The stories contained in this podcast are the recollections of the guests we've invited onto the show. We are an outlet for people to share their truths, and we accept no legal responsibilities for the stories contained herein.
I'm Kendra Sheets.
And I'm Rich Gill.
And this is Enough, a podcast that aims to shine light into the darkened corners of the music industry while discussing the ways we can and should improve ourselves and, in turn, our community.
Welcome back to another episode of the Enough podcast. Today we have our guest, Rosie Richeson. Depending on the musical leanings that you have, you may know Rosie as the singer/screamer of now put to bed band Night Witch. But she also has some other musical endeavors that are currently ongoing. Let me kick it over to you, Rosie, if you could give us a little bit of introduction about you, yourself, how you got into music, what led you to the punk scene and where you are now.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Rosie. I use she and her pronouns. I'm just used to saying that in my intro at this point. I was doing vocals in a band called Night Witch for about 10 years, from 2013 to 2023. And in that band, I talked about lots of stuff in relation to sexual assault and my frustrations with the punk scene. And before that, I've just been doing punk shows since I was about 14 years old. I was lucky enough to grow up in Tampa, Tampa, Florida, baby, where the skate park of Tampa, as seen on Tony Hawk's Pro Skate or something. I grew up and went to that venue. It was an all-ages venue and sober space, so my mom felt comfortable dropping me off, at a show and knew the owner and things like that. So I've just been involved in DIY punk shows since I was a wee lass, My first band was with my sister. She was a singer-songwriter, and I learned the drums and played along with her for a lot of stuff. My first job was at the aforementioned skate park of Tampa, where I worked door and tried to kick people out when I was 17. And they were like, who is this literal child? After that, I moved to Tallahassee, Florida, where I started another band called Sleeping Spiders with my dear friend Robert Carter. I played drums in that band, but the first time I saw a vocalist scream stuff that really got to me in a crazy core way, it was a band called the Here's Collective, if you're familiar. I had seen crazy hardcore bands like that before, but for some reason this band just hit me in a way that knocked me completely over and made me want to be in a band like that. Full circle stuff. That first time I saw that band was in Philadelphia, and now I live in Philadelphia. So I'm in a band with Scott from Here's. So really true rags to riches story with that one. But yeah, I still go to shows, still in a band. I'm playing drums in a band called BOOB, and it's great.
Is Tattooed Mom still a place out there? That's still open?
Tattooed Mom's still there around. They do really cool drag shows a lot. I don't know if they do punk shows. I haven't seen any. I
just always remember that place as being the punk bar that you go after the show.
Yeah.
And just everyone hung out there. And I always really liked that place.
Yeah, that place is really, really cool. I also have to come clean that I've only lived in Philly for 3 years, and I have a terrible sense of direction. So any Philly people that are listening and I say something wrong about Philly, I don't know where anything is. I was about to say oh yeah, Tattoo Moms is in South, but then I'm second guessing myself. So anyway, if I say some shit that's wrong about Philly, I'm sorry. I'm trying. But yeah, Tattoo Moms is still around.
That's great.
But do you have an Eagles jersey? You have to have an Eagles jersey.
I don't have an Eagles jersey. I have an Eagles shirt that I bought off the street the day of the Super Bowl.
That's much better. That's the way to do it.
Totally.
Yeah. You saved $90.
Yeah. It worked out.
So one of the reasons that we asked you onto the podcast was you actually were a guest on another podcast of one of my friends, and partially because you were platforming yourself and speaking out against sexual assault and violence in the music scene and just in general. But people would come to you and they would share their stories. And could you talk a little bit about what that's like to bear your experiences on stage and then step down off of that platform and then have people just kind of deluge you with their trauma in a way?
It was crazy, I gotta say. It was a lot. Lots of different emotions. I still don't know if I've ever been able to like really take appreciation for what that was in the moment. So what I mean is that like, yeah, after I would play shows, in between songs, I would talk about what each song was about. And one of the songs, I just talked about how sexual assault is horrible in the punk scene, and people who continue to support like men, but other people in the hardcore and punk scene just because they put on good shows or they're in a really cool band, but they know that they're a bad person and they sexually assaulted someone else. So I would talk about that stuff a lot on stage. And then, yeah, like you said, afterwards, folks would come up and just share their stories about the sexual assault that they've experienced, and really heavy shit. And a lot of the times it was a mixed bag of emotions of having a crazy adrenaline rush because I just had gotten off the stage and literally was screaming and out of breath, sweaty, feeling gross, sensory nightmare, right? Then a lot of folks just would tell me like, I'm so glad you talked about this. I'm currently dealing with this stuff and the same shit in our scene and like in the city that we just played, right? There was a moment that I remember specifically, I think it was in Tennessee, if I remember correctly. A group of women just gathered outside of our van and we had a literal circle. We're very disheveled, so sweaty, disgusting, and these beautiful women all around me. And we were having a really hot, like heart to heart, sharing their story about different sexual assaults that they've experienced. And like that, I saw them talk to each other about like, oh my gosh, that guy did that to you. He did that to me. Like it happened right there. Like commune formed of women in this particular scene who had experienced horrible shit and folks connecting over it. So to answer your question, it was hard. It was powerful. It was extremely like moving in a lot of ways to feel like folks could come to me, and humbling in a lot of ways too, and triggering. I'm going to be real. It was really hard to like hear all of that a lot and feel good afterwards. We would have like hour-long conversations in the van afterwards, or like at whoever's house we were staying at afterwards too, just like processing as a band all the shit that it would usually be me that I had heard, and just like, guys, I am not doing well, you know?
It's like you had these impromptu support group meetings after the show, which as I'm saying that, I'm like, there should be a band that does that, because if anyone wants that idea, run with it, because that sounds like something that would be incredible.
Yeah. So I have a background in like a mental health thing that I wanted to do in Tallahassee called The Outlet. And it was basically just finding accessible forms of mental health, and like having music inform how someone might access mental health support, or using music and like the scene that we're in as healthy outlets to express yourself and like work through shit too. The whole reason of starting that is because I was around so many people in the punk scene that were dealing with a lot of shit, and we wanted to like start something that kind of catered to these folks and like was from folks that were within the punk community and got it, you know? It didn't come to the fruition that I wanted it to, because I was 23, 24, trying to start a nonprofit with no experience, you know, and no money, and like other like post-grad or undergrad students who were in the same boat. But not to like toot my own horn, but I think a very noble task to try to do. It was inspired by a space called Nucci Space in Athens, Georgia, that provides peer-to-peer counseling or alternative forms of therapy, like art therapy, poetry therapy, music therapy, things like that, to musicians specifically. And I saw this space when we were on tour once, and it was just like, why doesn't every city have this? It's so fucking cool. It came from, like I said, a place of being surrounded by people in the music scene who were not well mentally, and like using music as one of their only outlets. And so, yeah, we called the mental health organization that we started, we called it The Outlet. It did aim to try to like use music and a way to just get people to start talking about mental health and wellness. Florida at the time was 49th in the country for amount of money spent on a person for like mental health care. I think it was like $12 of government money went to one person or something like that, like when you broke it down. So like living in the state that was extremely hostile to people living with mental health issues, being part of a scene where I was talking people down from suicide, having a ton of people take their own life in different ways through like struggling with substance abuse and just wanting to do something about it and bring that conversation forward a little bit. Talking about mental health can be very stigmatizing for a lot of people. One thing I loved about punk, still do, is that we can talk about these very vulnerable and potentially stigmatizing things through the medium of screaming through a mic about how you want to die, you know, like, or playing an acoustic show or making a zine or something like that. So we did start it with really good intentions. We raised money through booking punk shows because we didn't know how to put on like fancy big donor fundraisers. I remember we got donated $100 once and I cried because it was so much money. And like for a second there, we did have a venue where it was half venue, half mental health space, except the mental health space was a closet with a computer inside of it. So we didn't do anything out of it. But we did run some peer-to-peer support groups. We connected people with local therapists that went on a crazy, like low sliding scale. And it was a really wonderful effort to try to do something good with the bad situation that we were in. I went to college and like many people learned about feminism for the first time and became like the most annoying version of myself you could possibly imagine. It started out with like very simple shit that we hear now in 2025, hearing about the shit that kept getting me canceled over and over again in Tallahassee, Florida is so funny. My first big cancellation, it was on some like forums, like not even when Facebook was a thing, but I was like, why is everyone starting a band with the same 5 men? There are women. There are no bands with women in town right now. Why aren't you starting bands with women? And one of the responses I got was like, there just aren't any women who play any music in town. And like, it's so funny now to like look back on that was a real issue that like I started a band with women. We played one show.
Just sort of there are, see?
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
Oh, and sorry, to like tie it together too. I don't know if you remember that band Reviver.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know that they went on that tour that was like every opening act has to have at least one woman in the band. And they came through Tallahassee and that was a huge issue. And so I formed an all-girl band. We played one show. It was with Reviver.
That was the one show?
Yeah.
That's
that was
awesome.
the one show. Yeah. It was just that like the quote unquote cancellation that I had was around that show of me being like, guys, there aren't women playing music. What the hell? So I've been like a loudmouth about that stuff for a while, since birth probably, but.
Do you have any concerns when you are speaking out about what to you seems so intrinsically right and correct and reasonable and rational about getting canceled, about losing some sort of like status or what your next move would be? Like, what if you didn't have this because they closed the door and locked it on you?
Yeah. No, that's never literally crossed my mind because I'm right every time. Like, I've just been right every single time. It's not something I'm sorry. I'm a Scorpio.
I love this. No. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm a Virgo. My best friend is a Scorpio. Like, both of my best friends are Scorpios. So, like,
yeah.
Virgo also.
Yeah. So you guys get it. Exactly. Like, the thing is, if I was saying something controversial, I would be like, ooh, maybe this will be received badly. But using that same example from like 2011 or whenever that was, women should be in bands is not a controversial statement. You should start more bands with somebody beyond the 5 people that you've started 6 bands with. Like, branch out, man. Come on.
But that goes beyond like a need for like gender diversity and just audible diversity, because if you have the same 5 people in every band, they're just going to be the exact same band eventually.
Brother, welcome to Tallahassee in 2012. Like, oh my God. But yeah, it was
Minneapolis too.
Yeah, and you know, I'm talking shit about Tallahassee. I love Tallahassee. But yeah, to answer your original question, no, I've never backed down from saying that stuff or speaking out about it. Especially in the moment, I'm just like, this is really obvious. Why don't people? I'm sure I'm not the first one to say this, right? And like, looking around metaphorically being like, right, right. And to have a reaction of like, no, actually is crazy. It makes me feel insane. So, no, I don't think I've shied away from being a loudmouth about stuff out of fear of cancellation. Like what you said, like if they shut their doors after I say like something non-controversial, like don't be transphobic at a punk show. Like, I don't want to be in a band with those people. I don't want to go to shows with those people. Fuck them. So yeah.
Punk and all of its like weird little offshoots of hardcore and, you know, pop punk and all of that is supposed to be the antithesis of, right? The alternative, the kind of forward thinking, you know, we see it different, therefore we can see through the lies kind of shit. So it feels like you're just smashing your head up against a piece of concrete when you're telling someone like, hey, this person raped someone, maybe don't play a show with them until they acknowledge what they've done to another person in regards to harm. Or, you know, maybe we should be careful when this person's allowed in our community and there should be, you know, some sort of conversation around accountability or what the next step would be. And people are like, no, they play really good 3-chord pop punk, so they're back in.
Yeah, no matter when it happens, it's always, like you said, it just makes me feel like an insane person because I just feel like it's so obvious. Like, don't we all share the same values? Hello? And I think, you know, times have changed, hopefully. From what I've seen, the controversial statement of like women should be in bands is not a controversial statement anymore. And I do feel like the needle has kind of like gone in the direction of like progress a little bit within the punk community. There's always going to be those weirdos that are like Trump supporters, but also going to punk shows. It's those outliers. But, you know, I think that people are just scared to deal and didn't have any direction and still don't in a lot of different ways. But
people of a certain age and genre of punk are like, well, this is the way it's always been, and punk's supposed to be dangerous, and it's, you know...
Dangerous for who?
Yeah.
Right. Dangerous should not be like, oh, I'm scared I'm going to get assaulted. Like,
yeah,
that's not the kind of danger that punk should be.
Imagine thinking about going to a show and being like, let me just toss up. I might get assaulted there, but I really want to see that band. Do I go to the show? Yes, no. Like, why would you... Like, I'm thinking about not flying for the rest of the year because planes can't stop crashing. Like, I'm not going to go to a punk show thinking 50-50 chance I might get raped.
And even if it wasn't as, like, that obvious of a threat, it's still like, ooh, I know that these people support someone who did great harm to our community. Being in a space that's supposed to be alternative and different to the mainstream and like for the freaks, for the weirdos or whatever, but then they're still perpetuating the same shit that is perpetuated in greater society. It sucks. And it's so strange to like feel that. And I know a lot of people probably just want to shut their eyes to it and just be like, no, we're still different. We do a lot of really good shit too. You know, that guy does suck, but like his friends are really cool. And, you know, like I hear the excuses that people could come up with to continue and like not confront it. People hate confrontation. They're freaked out by it, you know? It's a hard spot to be in, and I don't envy somebody who is new to navigating this shit, you know? Like, I feel like I've been around the block a few times in terms of navigating, finding that information out and like what to do. And I feel like, I don't know, that folks have kind of progressed beyond the like black and white way of thinking, you know what I mean? Like, well, cancel them forever. They're out of here. Fuck them. Make them leave, exile, whatever. Sometimes it is necessary, but like, I think folks are trying to take a healthier stance with that to like try to work with the situation with more nuance and like go towards healing, go towards a place of healing, I suppose, versus just like, you're canceled. That's it. Goodbye. You know? It's confusing. It's a confusing world.
There's a lot of hurdles there, right? Because if you quote unquote cancel someone, the first thing is they go away for a little while and then they just like magically pop up on like a festival in like Germany and they're like, oh, guess what? They're back again. And then all of a sudden they make it back over to your country, let's say it's America, and then they start, doing a tour. Then they're back on track. Okay, they're not really canceled, and people kind of forget. We've all been ruined by like the 24-hour news cycle and social media. So we have like an attention span of like a goldfish at this point. So we kind of forget that this happened, just a year ago or whatever it is.
I've had people come up to me and be like, oh, I saw that this band was touring. Didn't something happen with them like a couple years ago? Didn't you like tell me about something? It's like, yeah.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, the keeper of knowledge. We all have one. I have my friend Kelsey has a great memory for that stuff. And I'm like, I feel like this band's canceled. What happened with them again?
Yeah.
Like right off the bat, there it is. It is exhausting to also keep up with too. Because the nature of punk is like this drummer assaulted somebody and then went away for many years and now is drumming in a different band, but you wouldn't recognize that. Because they're just some guy. Oh, that's that guy from that band. The shit part of it too is that that potentially perpetuates more harm within our community, not holding this person accountable and just letting them disappear for a year or so and then come back on the scene with no accountability or no learning that happened on their part. And they might have been quote unquote canceled and spent that year being resentful, for that, being like, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. I didn't even do anything. It's such a complicated thing that has no one solution beyond everybody kind of having the same mentality of this shit isn't okay to happen within this particular community or at all. But especially in these quote unquote safe spaces that are for people from alternative backgrounds and different histories and things like that.
A lot of the people are here in this scene, here being punk, because they have become othered because of things that have happened to them. Maybe they were assaulted. Maybe they were raped as a child. Maybe they have substance use issues that are co-occurring for something else that they're dealing with. I think it's just really tricky, especially in this genre. I mean, at this point, everyone's got a lot of stuff that they're dealing with, everyone across the board. But here it seems like a congregation of people who have been othered, who have been hurt, who have been wounded in some way, and they find solace. Punk is not just a genre to a lot of people. It becomes a day-to-day lifestyle, community. It's what you are. When people answered hey, what do you do for work? Or they're like, what do you do for your life? And people tell you their job. It's kind of like that, where you're like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I go to shows every single night because it makes the brain buzz not so loud.
Yeah. And I find other weirdos who I can relate with and talk to, and
no one gets it the same way as someone at a show.
Yeah. I'm still deeply in love with the punk community, unfortunately, too.
I wanted to ask you about this because it's every episode and definitely at least once a week via text. Rich and I talk about this. We both came up in this community. It's been decades. We put in a lot of time and effort into helping other people and, forming relationships and a social network and, all of that. And then just to kind of, especially, when we knew that these things were going on before the podcast, we were like, okay, what do we do with this? I have my own personal situations. He's been told things about, people in Minneapolis. I was being told things from people that I was near and dear to in Chicago and also on the West Coast because I lived out there for a while. And then you're just like, well, what do I do? And then once the podcast started, it's real hard to listen to punk music. It's so hard. They're tied. They're tied together intrinsically now. You're living in this world where another musician has done another thing to another person at a show or after a show, that it becomes almost like our personal reality where this is happening more than it's not because we're faced with this on a episode to episode basis. So it's becoming, I think, really hard to stay so enchanted with something that I was so in love with and thought was so much of a part of me for so long, because I'm seeing behind the curtain and it's the same as everything else out there. And I was leaving all that to go somewhere that I liked a lot better. And now what I like is not so nice anymore, I don't think.
Yeah. And I bet it's different. I mean, obviously it's different too. The thing that you're doing is hosting a podcast to have that outlet and hear about those experiences. I was playing a show, so I still had the, again, euphoria of being at a show and just playing and screaming and all of that. I still, every time we had those really hard talks after a gig or whatever, the thing before it was me having like the best time and like playing with my best friends and my husband and like, getting to still experience it. So I can imagine that like y'all, like the podcast fucking rocks, but not in the way that like a show might like replicate for you. And like, you're not getting that positive reinforcement with hearing all of the negative stuff too. So I bet it's so grating too to like try to still love punk after hearing about all this shit.
I'm on my own like personal journey after like a long time with COVID. It was just a COVID podcast, so like we're kind of getting back to it now, like way later when things have definitely opened up, and it's taken me a while to go back to shows. And I feel like when I go, I'm like almost forgot how great they are, where I'm like, I do love this. I do feel a sense of community. This is nice. And then I'll turn around and I'll see someone, I'm like, that guy raped someone. Fuck. What do I do about that? Like that happened to me a couple months ago. And I went up to someone and I was like, hey, a guy who raped someone I know is standing right next to me while I'm taking photos at this show.
Ew.
And the guy was like, well, okay, who is it? Let's just see. Let's keep eyes on him. I was like, okay, I guess we'll just all watch to make sure he doesn't rape anyone again. What are we going to do? Kick him out? Or we're just going to watch him?
Yes.
I don't, what are the answers here?
At least from that show, like kick him out of the show, like whatever. That sucks, dude. I also, like, I don't know how long you've been in the city that you're in. I don't know people that well in Philadelphia. And again, Tallahassee's so small. And I was there for 13 years, so I knew everybody. And yeah, like situations like you just described would happen. And it was hard to get through. And I would almost always end with me being the person to be like, hey, you gotta leave, and having to do that confrontation. Like living in a different city where I don't know who anybody is, or like know that history, like I wouldn't be able to spot a guy that I know assaulted somebody because I don't know anyone besides the people I know here, and none of them did that. I've been able to find that love again, and like honestly living in a bigger city where I don't know as many people. And like getting lost in the like just in the moment of it all, not really worrying about who's here. And from a sexual assault standpoint, from sometimes like a cool guy standpoint too, like, oh no, that guy's here, he's so cool, like I'm not gonna make a fool in front of myself. Like, nah, I don't have to do that because I don't know anybody. So yeah, I've been able to kind of keep that love alive, I suppose, by moving to Philly.
I sort of have the opposite thing where I moved from a large city, Minneapolis, and like I got really disillusioned with like bigger shows. Like this person's here and this band I really love is playing with this band that I know is shitty. But then moving to like a smaller town, the record store that I work at, we do like local shows. So I'll like work those or like go to those, and then just seeing like a room full of teenagers or like early 20s kids just going off for like a local band is like, oh, there is still good, cool shit happening.
Kids
like,
are all right.
The kids are all right. Like they're carrying the torch, and like
exactly. Oh my gosh. Honestly, seeing so many young people at shows recently.
Part of it is, at least for Minneapolis, like for the longest time, there were no all ages shows. Like the Triple Rock was like the all ages venue. The Triple Rock closed. So there was like no all ages shows for like a few years. So it was all 21 plus. And it's like, then it's just a bunch of people drinking.
Yeah. The last Night Witch tour that we did in 2023, there were so many kids at all the shows. And I remember this being a thing in Tallahassee. We were like, we want high schoolers to come to shows. We have an all ages sober venue in Tallahassee at the time. We did. Rest in peace. We had a punk person who like was a high school teacher too. And we tried to like, if you come with your high school ID, you get in for free to any shows. And the kids just weren't coming out. And that's all right. Now that same venue, or like around that same neighborhood, I guess, only kids go out. I've heard people my age go to shows there and being like, I'm ancient. I'm going to roar away with a gust of wind. Like, it's just so cool. And they're crazy violent at these shows in a fun way, in like a cool way, not in a like hate crimey way. They like are so excited to get their like face smashed in at a fucking like in a pit. They're so excited to just go the hardest they've ever gone for a fucking local band that just started or something. It's really cool to see.
That's the dangerous punk rock, that it's like, oh, if you're going to get like a boot to the head from a stage diver, like, okay.
Yeah.
That's the punk rock dangerous that I'm all about.
Yeah, exactly. And for a second, I wasn't. Again, when I learned about feminism, I was the most annoying version of myself. And I was just like, I made a little zine that had stuff about like stuff I found on Tumblr that was like, don't assault people. But also in the middle, it was like how to mosh. And it was unfortunately born out of someone groping me in the pit and like trying to cover it by saying like, you're just gonna get groped in the pit because you're a woman and you have boobs and people mosh like this, obviously. Like, no, so I made this little zine that was like, here's how you should mosh, and if anyone's uncomfortable, you should stop, like.
But I'm into that kind of.
I think I could have phrased it in a way that was a little less annoying.
I get it. But I feel like so many of us come into this and there's no rule book, right? Like, we don't know how to handle if you do get groped at a show. You try to talk to someone, but like, where do you go? Who do you talk to? The merch person? You talk to the person who's running the venue? Like, what if it's a DIY basement? You talk to the person who lives there? There's no real like rule book on this. And coming into this as like someone who's young, who's out of control and has a ton of like teen energy.
Yeah.
And they've got acne and they think that girls don't like them or vice versa or whatever. And you just want to like spin around in a circle and scream at a band that's just like audibly the coolest shit you've ever heard in your life. Maybe like give them a little guideline so they don't go groping people with their hands out and their eyes closed, squeezing it in the air. Like, I get it. I mean, there's no real rule. You don't have to put rules on everything, but like a little guidance. Keep them on track. Give them some empowerment, but keep them on track.
Yeah, it was well-intentioned and came from a place of like assault, unfortunately. But yeah, one of the Nightwood shows that we played, it was so funny. First of all, again, we were ancient withered beings in like at this show. I was like, hello kids, how are you doing today? Very young folks came out and someone's face got fully smashed, like blood on the wall, smashed. And I went up to this person afterwards. I was like, oh my God, do you need to go to the hospital? Are you okay? And they were like, no, dude, I'm doing great. My best friend did this to me. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah, go off, queen. So not for me. I like not being injured personally. That's just my old age. These bones don't grow back like they used to. But
I think that's part of it. But I also understand the idea of like getting so carried away. Like, I'm not much of like a hardcore person, but I've gone to a couple of hardcore shows recently, more so because of what hardcore is kind of turning into, was getting a little bit closer to what I also agree with me audibly. So I'm like, all right, let's go.
Less jockish.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I went to, it was a 5-band bill, and I am like a few years shy of 40, and I stood at the front with my camera like a goddamn champion, and I got punched, kicked, headbutted. Some guy jumped off the front of the stage and got my camera neck strap tied around his foot. And I was holding it with my arm. I just kind of wrap it around my arm. So my arm got ripped. And then some other dude like punched me in the head trying to like get the camera strap off the guy's foot. I was so happy that night though. Like, I walked out of there and I didn't feel better for like a month and a half because I am almost 40 years old and things do not heal like they used to with like magic 20-year-old blood. But like, it was such a good show. And I was like, all right, I can do this like maybe 3 times a year where I get this hurt, but like, it's kind of worth it and I love it. And this reminds me of how things used to feel.
I've started working door at shows because I like having a seat. I like being able to sit somewhere and stand on said seat to then see the band without being in all of it. And I get to yap with everybody. I get to be like, hi, like, it's really fun for me. So that's my New Year's resolution, is to like, yeah, I want to go to more shows, but I'll be more motivated if I have a little task to do, and like somewhere to sit and be comfortable about it. A certain type of punk that might be going to the fest in Gainesville, Florida, those types of punks, the very earnest, stoked to see ya type people, those folks aren't being super uplifted within the scene as role models anymore. I think there was like a spot where this is ironic I'm bringing them up, but Planet X, that like type earnest, like positive, like we're gonna get through it type thing. But no one thought it was cringe and everyone bought into it. But it feels like being outwardly friendly and like chit-chatting with new people at shows isn't really something that folks like to do anymore. And it does feel a little alienating, at least in my experience in Philly, to have gone up to somebody wearing the same band shirt as me, and I know the people in the band, to be like, oh my God, what's up? Like, I love your shirt. I know those guys. And then to just have that person be like, yeah, cool. And then just walk away. I don't know if it's just post-COVID stuff, if it's a Philly thing, it very well could be, or I don't know if it's something greater.
I feel like that kind of happens in every generation. It definitely happens when you move, for sure. I had that. I lived out in the West Coast for a long time, and then I moved back to Chicago. And I had that from people that my West Coast friends co-signed. They're like, meet these people, hang out with them. And I was like, great, friends. They're all the same group. We're in a national group full of friends, and this is going to be great. And they were total dickwads to me. Okay. And I don't see them anymore. And they still live in the city, and they still go to shows. And if I see them, I give them a nod, and that's it. But, like, you're not my people. And it takes a while in a larger city to find your people. But what I'm always worried about is when those walls are being put up, whether it's a situation like yours and mine where we're moving to a new place and people aren't as welcoming because they don't know your custom from out of state or whatever, or they're not willing to speak with you, or if it's a situation where the younger people are not as vocal and they're kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of snobby about like what their likes are, that does nothing but build up walls in these scenarios that we're in. So if you're trying to let someone know or let a large group of people know about a sexual predator, that easily moves throughout because they're usually in a band or in some sort of, they're a booker, they work at a venue. It's something where they have a lot of access to a lot of people. And if you're trying to kind of sound the alarm about this person so people are on guard when this happens, and there's these different segmented groups, it's a lot easier to pick people off from these groups for that person than for the whole community to come together and say, how do we hold this person accountable and have them, change their actions?
Yeah. Turning into like friend groups that have to deal with it. And that comes with a lot of complications. When your friend is called out for sexually assaulting someone, you're gonna want to intrinsically like close ranks around that person. And when power imbalances or like social hierarchy is inserted in situations like that, if you are part of a booking collective that's really, really popular in your city, and it's just you and a couple of your friends, and then somebody from that friend group is called out for sexual assault or comes out to have sexually assaulted somebody, it's hard to reckon with that, especially if you don't have anybody else in like that quote unquote collective that isn't just friends with this person, It's hard to build community when everyone is just insular to the people that they know. And, the young people that we might be approaching might just be awkward, maybe they're like 19 or 20 and they're just like, I don't know, what's this old lady? Like, I don't know, like,
ew, she likes things I like. She's so old.
Oh, what the hell? Like, I probably would have done that. Like, I remember doing that. Like, 30? That's so crazy. So I try not to, like, take it too personally when everyone's not, like, stoked to fucking talk to me, too. But it is just an intimidating thing. Also, at my big age, I've learned to, like, not, let that kind of stuff get to me. But imagine if another 20-year-old, like you were saying, would, like, go to a show and have that same alienating experience. They might just not fucking come back. At Night Witch's last show in Gainesville, so many different people came up to us saying, you guys were the first people to be nice to me at a punk show and the first people to talk to me at a punk show and, encourage me to start a band, just goof around with me and shoot the shit. It's beautiful and wonderful to hear that, but it's also a little bit discouraging. I wish that wasn't true. I wish more people were nice to you before us, That is something that I want to see change too, as young folks are doing all this really cool shit, like having shows in fucking sewer drainage places. And like, we recently played a show and it was a house show and there were like signs everywhere that said like, no phones, no filming. And it was like, again, mostly young people there. And it was so cool to have like, see that being not only posted everywhere, but like enforced. Someone told me to put my fucking phone away because I didn't know. But, you know, and it wasn't, I don't think for like legal reasons. I'm sure that had a factor, but I think they were just like young people now.
Be in the moment.
Fucking be in the moment. I think that's so cool, you know, to like see young folks like logging off like that in a big way for punk specifically is really cool.
Being in a band with older male members of the scene, has there been any conversations about what your experience versus what their experience is and what that's like?
Yeah, we've talked about how they just simply, by living longer than us, know more people. And again, caveat that they're in crazy big bands. So yeah, of course they know a lot more people than we do. But there were conversations in that band of like them feeling a little bit tired of having to do the promotion, having to do a lot of the stuff that they've done over and over and over again with different bands throughout the years, and kind of just wanting to like, you know, sit back and let the shows come to us. And then me and John, my husband, who's also the same age, being like, no, we have to be proactive about it. We have to like message people and like we have to go to shows to like make friends with people who are booking shows and like the bands that we want to play with. We have to like be friendly with people. And they're both like, no, I will not be doing that. If we go to a show, it better be worth it in terms of like bands that I deeply want to see and not just to like shoot the shit with a fucking 26-year-old, you know, like, so I think that the priorities and what they wanted to take charge of in the band is different based off of like just their age and their capacity at this point.
What about when it comes to like playing a show with a band that maybe has someone with allegations, people that maybe they know that something came out about or anything?
Yeah, we just wouldn't do it. Last tour, it was a very like small tour that we put together just simply for capacity, you know, and logistics reasons. And one of the shows was canceled and not rebooked because someone messaged us. Of course, our last tour after being a band for 10 years, and still somebody messaged us saying like, hey, somebody in that band did this horrible thing to me, blah, blah, blah. And like just went into the story and we were like, of course we're not playing that show. Thank you for telling us. It was just simple and easy for us to come to that conclusion.
It's such a simple concept when you say it that for some reason is so hard for...
We're a local band, so that we would get a lot of draw if people came. Like, I've heard it all. It sucks, and there's never a real excuse for it. It's just, you don't want to do the hard thing.
One of the main reasons why a lot of people in bands continue to play with people who have been outed as abusers or have allegations against them or are just kind of creepy weirdo fucks that like you just don't feel right around are because of the possible opportunities they could miss if they don't have their name as an opener on whatever fucking show this is.
To make that hard choice to do the hard thing. It's really fucking hard. And I think that like it will only become easier if we keep talking about it. So like the podcast is really fucking important. You know, I'm sure you guys have heard it so much, but this podcast particularly is one of the only spaces that I see continuing these types of conversations. You know, I haven't seen, and maybe this is just the shows I'm going to, but I haven't seen a like hardcore speech with a band in a really long time. Remember when bands used to make speeches? You know, I haven't seen that shit. We'll hear Free Palestine every once in a while. We'll hear, you know, fuck cops. And then, you know, like that's when the music starts.
Yeah.
Like, I would love a little bit more like nuance, a little bit more direction from the quote unquote stars of punk rock these days, you know?
Is there like this generation's like Bikini Kill or like Naked Aggression or like...
No. I wish I knew more
something like
the
that.
kids you're listening to.
Amyl and the Sniffers, like their songs are, I don't want to say militant, but like I haven't seen them live, so I don't know if they're like talking about that stuff in between.
That's the thing is like I am talking out of my ass at that point of like, oh, no one's doing speeches anymore. It's like me, I'm going to like 3 shows every 2 months, you know, like, you know, so maybe maybe they are, and maybe people are still talking about it, but that is been, and I know y'all know this, preaching the choir here, like talking about it brings change. Talking about it can bring change to small communities that might not have the tools or resources or guidance or whatever necessary. Hearing this podcast might be the only time that folks hear people talking about these issues within this particular subculture, you know? So it's important to keep talking about it. I hope that the apathy and irony and like sarcasm that comes with the new generation also is cool to like get serious and talk about this shit and not become apathetic to it, because that's so fucking easy to not care about shit, you know, because we are asked as people to care about so fucking much now, and you can't care about everything, and you just like feel bad about it, and then you spiral and you're like, you know. The optimist in me hopes that what I've seen of like the kids putting so much energy into putting on a show in like somewhere weird because they can and because they want to, instead of just doing it in someone's living room, they're like, let's go into the sewers and figure, like, let's go to a cave. Y'all see that? They're like, have you seen this? Yeah, they're like lowering speakers down with like cables and stuff into caves for gigs now. And it's just like, yeah, they're putting their entire life into this. And I think that's beautiful, to like turn inward on your community and build something cool and great is what will keep people going, what will give us resilience, and what will give us hope.
It's a form of self-care. We're all inundated with all of this madness all the time. And I think all three of us are pretty empathetic people, and you know, we care deeply about a lot of this stuff. The mental and emotional exhaustion that happens when you're so invested in this stuff, to just go and let loose at a fucking punk show or
nothing better.
A backyard wrestling show. You need that self-care. Otherwise, you'll go fucking crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel so happy to be like living in a city where I can go to a show every single night if I wanted to, which I fucking would never do with my body. But I could if I wanted to, and it would be a show from a different genre, from a different like part of town, a different group of friends that is in all varying different sizes. Some like teeny tiny, like 5 people show up at a house show versus like a huge venue show, like where everyone's popping off. I feel the most alive that I feel when I'm at a fucking show where everyone's having a good time. So I need to keep going to shows to keep myself alive. I'm not going to find resilience on like fucking Twitter or TikTok or like doom scrolling, you know? Like I'm going to find it in community, and my community happens to be punk fucking rock music.
Enough is a podcast centering on surviving abuse, harassment, and assault in the music scene. To help get the word out, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. In 2025, we are interested in talking to teachers, authors, artists, activists, counselors, community organizers, and anyone else who is dedicated to making a positive impact in their music community and our society as a whole. If that sounds like you, please reach out to us at thisisenoughpodcast@gmail.com.